Landscapes, whether man-made or natural, are chaotic, from the weather eroding a mountain away to a river meandering through a valley. And it's sometimes hard to see a compelling photograph in this chaos. But there's something that I always look for whenever I'm struggling to find a composition, and that's symmetry. Symmetry is where something has two or more matching halves. You could draw a line down the middle of a symmetrical photograph, copy and flip one side, and it would look exactly the same. There's also asymmetry, which is the opposite of symmetry. I'll talk about that a little bit later. The most obvious symmetrical form is a reflection, and this is horizontal symmetry. The bottom half is literally a mirror reflection of the top. Now, I was hoping to show you horizontal symmetry here, and when there's no wind on this lake, it's a perfect example. Now, on the sheltered side of the lake, there is a flat bit, so I'm going to try and get a photograph there. What I do is get really low, put the join of the lake and the landscape in the background down the center of the frame, and this would give me horizontal symmetry. Whenever there's a completely flat lake, I always look for this. So if you are struggling to find a good composition, look for a body of water and see if you can find this horizontal symmetry. You can also manufacture this by pouring a bit of water over a bit of pavement and then getting the camera low to that bit of water, or using a puddle like this. Even though today it's really windy, what I can do is get low here and take a photograph. Now, unless the puddle's huge, it's not the best, but it'll give you an idea and it will show you what is possible when you do have even a small body of water. There's also vertical symmetry. This is where each side of your photo is a mirror image of the other. Wes Anderson really uses symmetry as part of his hallmark. A volcano like Mount Fuji would be a great example of this, and even though it's not perfectly symmetrical, it's close enough to give you the impression of symmetry. I like to put that symmetrical line straight down the middle of my photograph, but you can place it to one side or the other in your frame. This can cause a little bit of imbalance, which can add a bit of conflict to your photograph. Buildings and man-made structures are another way to get symmetry in your photographs. You just need to be perfectly centered when taking the shot, like this old ski jump in Cortina in northern Italy. Again, it's not perfectly symmetrical, but close enough. To double up on this, you can sometimes find both vertical and horizontal symmetry. Again, going back to Mount Fuji, this fantastic photo was taken by Tani and shows both vertical and horizontal symmetry. To go against this idea, try and look for asymmetry. This is easier to find as the world is such a chaotic place, but it's harder to get a compelling photograph of it. In theory, any photograph that doesn't have symmetry is asymmetrical. But there's a little bit more to it than that. Many films use asymmetry when they give their character looking space. You might have a conversation between two characters, and even though each shot is asymmetrical, when the editor cuts between the two, they tend to balance each other out. And when you're photographing people, you can use this asymmetry as well. If you put them to one side of the frame looking into the frame, this is an asymmetrical shot. And if you're photographing a landscape, you can weight it to one side or the other, creating imbalance. You can have an unbalanced asymmetrical shot, but also a balanced asymmetrical shot. This is a photo of Gaiao Pass in Italy. It's an imbalanced photo as the mountain is heavily weighted to the left side of the photograph, but for some reason it works. Let me know in the comments below why you might think this is, or if you think it doesn't work, again let me know. It'll be interesting to hear your thoughts. On the other hand, this shot is asymmetrical, but it's a little more balanced. The brightness of the sunset is offset by the size of the boulders in the foreground to the right-hand side. So by consciously putting things in different places in your frame, you can create balance in an asymmetrical photograph. Now, to make things even more interesting, you can mix it all up, and I love doing this. I always look for symmetrical things in an asymmetrical scene, a little bit like this. And you can take this to a completely different level. A very popular one of this is to take a photograph with a road in the foreground, and you stand in the middle of the road, obviously watching out for cars. The road will give you that symmetry, and it'll lead into the chaos of nature and everything around it. Or in this case, the symmetry of the road being taken over by the encroaching desert. Or the symmetry of a lifeguard hut with the flag weighting the left-hand side. Or the symmetry of the mountain either side of the frame with the asymmetry of the lake and the clouds. Again, with the symmetry of that mountain under the cloud. So this one's a real mix-up of those two things. Another way to show this is by using a single point perspective. Now, if you don't know what this is, try watching some of Stanley Kubrick's films. He uses it a lot throughout all of his films. It's basically where all of the lines in your shot are all aiming to one single point. In this photo, in an abandoned building in North Wales, there is the chaos and dilapidation together with the symmetry of all those converging lines. And this was an intentional decision I made by centering myself with this room and shooting with a super wide angle. Now you can take this as far as you want, but you will get to a point where the symmetry is so subtle that the viewer won't be able to see it. And this is the fun part of photography. It's playing around with those different elements in your photograph to make them more or less dramatic and more or less subtle. I think this is a really fun exercise to do when you're struggling to find a composition, and it'll really make your photograph stand out from the rest. Next week, I'll be discussing framing in composition, and this is another fantastic tool to have in your work belt to really make compelling photographs. So make sure to subscribe and click that bell so you don't miss out. And once I've released it, I'll link it here. I'll see you next time.